Canada triggered World War III. What did they do? Exported ketchup chips. A flock of Canada geese collided with a Russian jet, sucking the foul into the engines and bringing down the plane. America, stop apologizing. Seriously, it's getting ridiculous. Canada, oh, sorry. War. What is it good for? Burnt down the White House again. That was the British source. I'm Canadian and I like history. Yep, British troops fresh from the Napoleonic Wars just kinda sailed up and kicked the shit out of the numerically superior defenders and burned the city. Only reason the city wasn't completely destroyed was the weather, and they had more important stuff to do than burn down a city. Our Canadian men were more concerned with defending and retaliating along the border. Stopped exporting maple syrup. Yep, the maple syrup embargo of 2023. A day that will live in infamy. December 17, 2023, a date that will live in infamy. Canada, a former British Dominion and ally, has stopped the exportation of maple syrup. This has halted world trade and has resulted in a declaration of war from the United States, as well as NATO. Two Canadian comedians made a crude film which angered mothers everywhere. Us is a fire. Shut you fucking face, Uncle Fuck. It won't actually be Canada, it will be the Canadian geese rising up to take over the world and exert dominance over the public parks of the world. If you have a problem with Canada gooses, you have a problem with me, and I suggest you let that one marinate. Can we eat the Canadian geese? Are they tasty? I hope they're tasty. Sending Chaucy to be the ambassador to the US, and then told Trump to give his balls a tuck. Denmark gifted Greenland to them. And give them Hans Island after all these years of booze war? Never. We'll keep taking down their flag and giving them schnapps, and they will like it. One day we'll leave Labatt Blue and that's when war is declared. They don't know, but whatever it is, they're sorry. They forgot to say sorry once. Sorry about that. It is too late, war has already broken out. I don't know what they did, but I'll bet it was Quebec. Don't you dare touch my poutine. Confused poutine with Putin. Caused a war. They sent in troops and aid to help the protesters in Hong Kong and pissed off China. Oh wow, I was expecting a thread full of jokes and stuff, but this could realistically happen. Edit. I've seen a whole bunch of comments deriding it for not being realistic. Allow me to clarify, in the context of this thread, Canada starting World War III, I think if Canada were to send troops to HK, it would very likely cause a huge problem. At the time I wrote it, the other top contenders were a South Park reference, cutting off the world's supply of maple syrup, jokes about apologizing, and one about being the only place left with habitable land/potable water. These are silly. We all know Canada won't do this. My original post should have said World War III really could happen if Canada did this. Yeah, I know, right? So much tension right now for a few reasons. It feels weird that Canada is having beef lol. They declare war on the world because there are too many horrible people and they want to spread wholesomeness. We jacked up the tax on maple syrup to 80%, but only to tourists. Sold the Candu reactor to China and India. Oh wait, did that years ago. They bombed the Baldwins, don't you remember? North Korea asked them to start it and they were too polite to say no. They found some nuclear bombs and gave them away to anyone asking for them. Real talk, they try enforce their claims to the Northwest Passage that is opening up due to global warming, and things spiral out of control from there. Canada is situated squarely in the winner box of global warming. It has large areas of uncultivated land that will soon be warm enough to farm. It has long-standing control over islands and patches of ice which are now turning into navigable waterways to help cut down on shipping distances, and they benefit greatly from being the USA's neighbor. If they play their cards right, they'll be a major economic/political powerhouse as the rest of the world starts to bake in the sun. The idea of people cultivating land in northern Canada is a pipe dream. As someone who lived in northern Alberta for 18 years, I can attest to the following: in the prairies, that land is all gross swampy shit with poor nutrients. North of that we have tundra, the ground of which has remained frozen year-round for probably 1,000,000 years or more, and so we can count on it not having any proper nutrients inherent in the soil, not to mention that soil is pretty thin and probably not going to be useful for farming. In the east, it's all rock. The Canadian Shield is basically just a granite plate cut by glaciers and sitting underneath the only trees capable of burying their roots into stone and living on rocks. Sure, all that crap will get warm, but that's not going to make a difference. A warm swamp is still a swamp, and you can't grow shit on a hot rock, either. Instead, what's going to happen as the world warms is everything is going to catch fire. We've seen it with the huge amount of forest fires lately, the wildfires that made international news in Fort McMurray back in 2016, the fact that British Columbia has basically not stopped burning in about as long, and the fact that the entire province of Alberta keeps ending up in months-long fire bans because of a lack of rainfall due to changing climate patterns. And for that matter, who can even be certain that the water resources available to Canada aren't completely dependent on current weather patterns? I expect that a shitload of desertification will happen in the shadow of the Rockies. The climate of southwest USA will simply move up to the 49th parallel. I am not a meteorologist, though, who knows? Conservatives who beat the global warming is actually good for Canada drum need to be educated properly, or they need to be called out as the disingenuous liars that they are. Global warming is catastrophic for Canadians, just like everyone else. Exactly, the Arctic right now is an unmitigated disaster. There's a South Park joke here somewhere. Terence and Philip made fart jokes about Putin in Russia. They were taken prisoner. The rest is history. Weaponized Canadian geese. The Mounties decided it was their time for glory. They ride their bears and moose into battle against the rest of the world, cutting down all in their path. Hockey finals, Canada versus Russia. They poured maple syrup in the Russian hockey gear, laced their food and water with pot, start a massive line brawl, and forward Vladimir Putin gets wrecked. Maple syrup and pot, the Canadian version of tarred and feathered. Last country on earth with a decent amount of drinkable water. Yeah. Canada's geopolitical power is going to rise significantly in the next century or so. As temperatures rise, their vast reserves of land will become more and more attractive, and their vast reserves of fresh water will be useful for agriculture. On the other hand, perhaps this will lead to war with the USA over the Great Lakes. Edit, I think similar things could be said for Russia, but even more so for Canada, as there is less general hostility towards Canada, and Canada has a far less complex geopolitical situation at the moment, i.e. not bordering China. Russia could defend itself far better, however I think the US would have a vested interest in defending Canada from aggression if necessary, unless of course it is the aggressor itself. Greater than yeah. Canada's geopolitical power is going to rise significantly in the next century or so. As temperatures rise, their vast reserves of land will become more and more attractive, and their vast reserves of fresh water will be useful for agriculture. Unless Nestle pumps it all out for pennies on the gallon. China sends tanks into Hong Kong and kills a few thousand protesters. Canada responds by creating a list of 50,000 people with direct ties to the Chinese government and seizing their properties in Canada. China responds by executing a bunch of Canadian citizens in China, and imposing a huge tariff on Canadian goods. They also announce that they are going to seize certain goods that are in transit to China. A Chinese warship moves in on a US-flagged container ship loaded with Canadian goods on its way to China. The container ship refuses to be stopped, turns back towards North America. Maybe there is some dispute about whether it is heading towards Canadian waters or American, and broadcasts an SOS which is picked up by a US destroyer. The captain of the US destroyer moves in and broadcasts a challenge to the Chinese ship. Phones start to ring in Beijing and Washington. It's 2 a.m. in Washington. Donald Trump, sleepy, groggy, without any aids available for instant consultation, says don't let them take that ship. The order goes out verbatim. The Chinese warship gets orders not to fire, but not to break off either. It is closer to the container ship than the destroyer is and is going to reach it first. The US destroyer's captain has his orders. He fires first. Easy there, Tom Clancy. Justin Bieber 2, Electric Boogaloo. Canada lost the final hockey game in the Winter Olympics because someone obviously bribed the refs, so military action was the only acceptable response. Edit, thank you for my first silver. I see nothing wrong with this. Where do I enlist? Scotiabank Arena. They invaded Turkey. And you know what? They're calling it chicken. Thank you, Jeremy Hotz. They made vehicles and machines run on maple syrup but don't share the secret how to do it.